Thanks for joining us. And wow, that photo was amazing. Thank you, everybody, for standing there and doing that. Way to go. I can't wait to see the pictures. Thank you, Occidental College and Oxy Arts, for inviting us to create such a special day on our main event sponsor, ArtLogic. We'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that these events take place on and occupy the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva as the original caretakers of the Tovanga, which spans LA County, parts of northern Orange County, and the southern Channel Islands. We pay our respects to the ancestors, the elders, and our relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to our flagship panel. Following this panel, we will have 8 community conversations happening simultaneously from 12:30 to 1:30, and an afternoon panel titled No Unsolicited Submissions, Navigating Relationships with Curators and Galleries, happening from 1 to 2-ish. We hope you join us for these events, and for now, let's introduce this session. Serving as a contextual framework for the day's events, we are delighted to welcome to you our flagship panel titled Equal Percent, Ongoing Strategies for Resisting Sexism in the Art Market, organized and moderated by artist Catherine Andrews, founder of the Judith Center. This panel will examine both historical and contemporary approaches to addressing sexism within the contemporary art market. Drawing from varied perspectives, panelists will reflect on strategies that have proven effective with the aim of identifying areas where future individual, collective, and institutional efforts will have the greatest impact. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Jori Finkel, arts journalist and writer for the New York Times and Art newspaper, Sandra Jackson Dumont, cultural strategist, curator, producer, and Getty Research Institute presidential scholar, artist and activist, and a founding member of the Guerrilla Girls. And Anuradha Vikram, associate curator, Performance Art Museum, and our moderator, the founder of the Judith Center, artist Catherine Andrews.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. Thank you so much, Kim, and all the organizers and sponsors of today's historic series of events. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the remarkable group of people joining us today and give a little bit longer introduction to each of them. If I were to read their full biographies, we'd be here all day, so I'll keep it short. Jori Finkel is a Los Angeles-based art journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Art newspaper, Art News, and other leading publications. She is widely recognized for reporting on contemporary art, museums, biennials, public art, and the international art world. In addition to her journalism, she's contributed essays and texts to numerous exhibition catalogs and publications for major museums, galleries, and cultural institutions. Next to her is Sandra Jackson Dumont, a curator, educator, and cultural strategist whose work explores the role of museums in public life and civic engagement. She's held leadership roles at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Seattle Art Museum. She was most recently director and CEO of the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art and currently serves as the Getty Research Institute presidential scholar while contributing to numerous advisory boards and cultural leadership committees focused on the arts, humanities, and public engagement. Kata Kolvitz is a founding member of the Guerrilla Girls, the anonymous artist and activist collective that for more than 40 years has used bold visual campaigns, public interventions, humor, and data-driven research to expose sexism and other inequities in the art world. Through projects presented nationally and internationally, the group has helped bring unprecedented public attention to issues of representation and equity in the arts. Anuradha Vikram is a writer, curator, and educator. They are the author of Decolonizing Culture, Essays on the Intersection of Art and Politics, have curated exhibitions, biennials, and public programs for a wide range of cultural institutions, currently serve as associate curator at the Performance Art Museum, and are a continuing lecturer in the Department of Art at UCLA. Okay. Today we're here to do one thing: identify and discuss what we believe are some of the most effective and impactful approaches to addressing sexism in the art market. You might wonder why we will be focusing on the art market rather than the art world more broadly. The reason is simple: the market has an outsized influence on nearly every sector of the art world, shaping which artists are supported, which institutions thrive, and which cultural narratives receive visibility. And while we will discuss a range of different sectors today, it is with that influence firmly in mind. This panel will cover a lot of ground, and it might be thought of as a kind of mother panel, hopefully giving birth to many more to follow. As we talk today, slides will be running in the background with statistics reflecting the status quo. To start, however, I'd like to point out a few major facts to set the stage. Feel free to boo. As many of you know all too well, sexism has long been a major problem in the art world, and more specifically in the art market. It persists today and by some measures has worsened. In the United States, economic inequality has increased dramatically over the last several decades. According to the US Federal Reserve, since 1989, the share of wealth owned by the richest 1% has risen from approximately 23% to nearly 32%, while the bottom half of Americans continue to own only about 2 to 3% of the nation's wealth. Also, according to the Federal Reserve, white families in the United States continue to hold a vastly disproportionate share of that wealth. At the highest levels, wealth remains heavily concentrated among older white men who continue to dominate major asset ownership, corporate equity, and inherited wealth structures. Because the contemporary art market remains heavily dependent on private wealth in the United States, these broader economic patterns have direct implications for the arts. Some have argued reasonably that the inequalities we see in the art market cannot be separated from these broader patterns of wealth concentration. When economic power is concentrated within a relatively narrow demographic, that concentration can shape which artists are collected, which exhibitions are funded, which institutions thrive, and ultimately which cultural narratives receive visibility and historical recognition. What I am describing essentially is a system of white dominance maintained through the concentration of wealth and power. And while we are here today to focus specifically on gender, it becomes difficult to separate sexism from questions of race and class when viewed in this broader context. My hope today is that rather than spending too much time on the current state of affairs, we can focus on solutions, and in particular on those we believe are effective. Testing. Can you guys? Perfect, thank you. The first solution I'd like to discuss is how we can better recognize the ways we may uphold sexism even while working to challenge it, and how white women in particular can better recognize the ways we may continue to uphold racism and classism, an issue that has been the subject of feminist critique for decades. I'd like to start with you, Jori. So I'd like to begin with a question for you. In conversation, you mentioned that after years of advocating for women artists through your journalistic work, you came to recognize ways in which you had unknowingly participated in the perpetuation of sexism. You also spoke about how working within influential institutions shaped your own thinking in ways you did not fully understand at the time. Can you speak to that process of recognition?
Yeah, I remember talking about that. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. Process of awakening is how I would describe it, that has taken place for me over the last 30 years. I think I've been writing about art. I've been working as a journalist for almost 30 years now. And this process of awakening to the role that I play in perpetuating some of the misogyny in the art world. It's kind of taken place slowly and then also all at once, as so many of these things, awakenings do, where the all at once, the easy to describe part of it was in 2014. I had been writing about art for the New York Times for quite a while, with a few years at the LA Times in between. And I found myself in the same year covering in big, kind of big Sunday profile type covers, Sunday profile type stories, covering Mark Grochon I'm going to name names, in one article, and a couple months later for W Magazine, where I also write, Jordan Wolfson. And after those couple of months, I woke up feeling sick to my stomach. I was also pregnant at the time, which may have played a role in being sick to my stomach, or may have also just exacerbated my feeling that I was doing something as a journalist, I get to choose my own stories. As a freelance journalist, one of the benefits of being a freelance journalist is you can say no to things, and you pitch your own stories, you make your own coverage. How did it end up that I was covering these two kind of white male art stars, one of whom I respect a little, the other not at all? It was a real moment of awakening for me, where I'm like, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to let this happen again. The way that it happens is insidious. The way that it happens is that these, in both cases, both stories, these artists have the powerful museum behind them, very powerful dealers behind them, and powerful publicists. So it's not just that I found out about a show coming up that I could cover. It's that my editors were being hounded at the same time in New York, so that all of the kind of forces colluded. Sometimes I call the art market one big consensus-making machine. And I felt like this was an example where they had all the people fighting for them to get that coverage. I'm not going to do that anymore. Instead, I made a point that even if I lost work for a while, and at times I do, I'm going to cover the artists who really matter to me. I'm going to give up that part of my work. Gave it up, and but this is not meant to be self-congratulatory. I just, it's hard because sometimes the stories don't come in now, and I have to fight for each and every story. I was just telling Sandra that I'm going to visit Maren Hassinger tomorrow. That was not an easy story thank you, because she deserves the coverage in the New York Times. But that's not an easy story to get placed. So I have to fight for each and every story. And what I found is that my work did not dry up completely, and I got to cover artists, whether it's Maren Hassinger or Lita Albuquerque or Alison Sarr, closer to home, who I really adore. And that made a big difference for me in opening up the kind of work that I do. Is that what you were thinking of, Catherine? Mm-hmm. That particular story of me being sick to my stomach?
Have you experienced pushback from your editors when you've said, hey, I want to shift the focus over here? Or have you been able to make inroads? And have you felt that there have been real financial repercussions for you when you've made this kind of choice?
Yeah. I don't get as many stories. I don't get as many profiles, I think. But in some ways, I benefited from a kind of media frenzy over Black artists in particular that has occurred in the last, I don't know where we'd say it started, but, it wasn't hard to get coverage. It wasn't hard to get a front page story on Mark Bradford when he did the Venice Biennale. So some things are harder than others, but to stick with them, for sure. And what it does, it opens up more time for me to do other kinds of projects. So I was able to make a documentary about artists and mothers. I can't get motherhood into the pages of the New York Times. My editors aren't interested.
I'm curious also, I think there's this idea or stereotype that the system is impenetrable, but I think anybody who's been in the art world knows so much happens through personal relationship and very intimate personal conversations. So I'm curious, Jori, if you have experienced that with some of your editors, they've come to trust you more, you've actually been able to change their opinion simply by sticking to your guns and being forceful.
Yeah, that is the way to do it, I think, is that I have the personal relationships. I can make stories happen. Even stories that I don't know that I'm the best qualified person to write. I mean, I wrote a story for W Magazine 4 or 5 years ago about Native artists who were crossing over and getting gallery representation. And now they're artists who you probably heard of, Deani Whitehawk, Rose Simpson. And this should be a story written by an Indigenous writer. But I was the one with the relationships to make the story happen. And because I was conflicted that way, I also worked with the artists and empowered the artists in a way. They got to choose the other artists in the story. They helped me set the direction of the story in a way I normally don't do as a journalist.
I think you answered the question I was going to ask you next, but maybe you might elaborate on it. Like when you go to write a story and you feel like, oh, I'm going to talk about maybe a cultural background I don't know much about or I'm not that in touch with, what do you do to see your own blind spots?
And I don't know. I try to see my own blind spots. You know, I think that's maybe the ruder awakening. The ruder awakening that I've had over the last 30 years is that I always think of myself as part of the solution, and to think of yourself as part of the problem is important.
I think this is such a huge topic, and I think it's a sensitive one because, you know, we all carry shame around this, and then there's an unfair amount of labor put on groups that are more oppressed to kind of be the ones to wake up the oppressors. But I just want to thank you and say, I hope we can continue having this.
And now we'll let other people speak.
Yeah,
I hope so.
And thanks for being the first in that, Jori. I appreciate that. Anuradha, I'd like to turn to you. Many institutions now speak the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion through their exhibitions and public programming. Yet their funding structures, leadership pipelines, and relationships to power often remain largely unchanged. In your 2017 book, this is a great book, guys. You should all run out and pick up a copy. And there may be an update coming. So, in your 2017 book, Decolonizing Culture, Essays on the Intersection of Art and Politics, you describe an alternative to contemporary art landscapes filled with white audiences and white critics and imagine a future other than one in which the only qualified makers are artists trained in a system built to serve white cultural dominance. Do you think we've moved meaningfully toward that vision over the last decade since the release of your book? And if so, has there been any impact on gender equity?
Okay, that's a huge question. And I have to say a qualified yes. I mean, I do think, but it's also a yes with a backslide, right? Because if you asked me this 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have had a more enthusiastic yes than I do at the moment when, if you look around the landscape of Los Angeles institutions, we've seen a number of people in the administration side who are people of color, particularly women of color, step away, and they haven't been replaced with people of similar backgrounds. And I think that reflects the fact that the people, as you mentioned initially, who have the most money reflect certain demographics and they don't feel as implicated as they did a few years ago. And I think a lot of the trends that we've seen toward better inclusion are in fact trends. So in that sense, you know, it's hard to say. What I would like to see more of is more of the communities who are underrepresented using their own economic power and their own cultural power to counter. I think, you know, for example, the Cheech in Riverside is a fantastic example of that. And I think, you know, in my own community of South Asians, we have very few in the United States, if any, who are doing that kind of investment with that kind of sophistication or attention. Obviously, that's a lot to ask. You know, we hope that collectors have that kind of sophistication and attention, but it isn't necessarily what the system is rewarding right now either. And we've seen a lot of shifting away from the kind of deep investment that collectors of any background, or even, you know, the possibility of people viewing themselves as collectors being more working class, or just having, you know, government jobs, that kind of thing, right? A little bit less sexy, a little less connected to finance and speculation, but everything's about speculation now. I do think it's totally possible for artists from marginalized backgrounds to successfully win that game. Julie Moretti was a fantastic example, right? It's not impossible for someone who's a Black lesbian artist to win the painting auction game. So that's a kind of equality that the market offers, but it's the kind of mixed bag of capitalist equality where it's like, well, you know, you too can be worth a lot of money in a system that is a winner-take-all system. Does it reflect the values that I think, you know, we want to live by? You know, I'm sure she makes other choices. I don't want to indict any one artist for being successful because I don't think that that is really fair. But I do think that, you know, we all make choices as to where we're going to participate in a system that's not really serving us. And when I talk to students, what I tell them is, you know, we're all here. We don't control this institution, but we need to take more from it than we give it, right? And so that's kind of as good as it gets right now. Yeah.
It's interesting, some of your examples, like maybe Julie Moretti, I think is someone who has given back in creating residencies for other artists, or the Cheech Museum. Like both of these examples are individuals really saying, hey, this is my responsibility. Let me take action and try and make a difference here. Do you see that as a place where inroads can be met? Are we really looking at singular individuals going, okay, let me do this big lift because it's not being done out there so much otherwise?
I think it puts way too much responsibility on the artists, and it makes artists into nonprofit administrators in a way that isn't necessarily constructive. I don't see other communities having to do that and putting that responsibility on their artists in the way that artists of color are expected to fill that gap. Partly, I think it is an internal community problem. Like in my own South Asian community, we don't see our collectors or our people with money, of which we have plenty. And, you know, Indian Americans in particular are one of the best resourced communities financially in the United States of immigrant communities. And we do almost nothing for our artists, and we build no residencies, and we tend to spend our money in very traditional and conservative ways. And that's an internal problem, you know, but I also think that something to consider is minoritized communities in this country, and I would say probably around the world, but I can only really speak to this country because I grew up here, need to stop seeking approval from the dominant class. At a certain point, we have enough money. We could do it ourselves, and we often don't. And I'm going to call out women in particular here, because women of all colors at this point have more economic power than they ever have before. But do they use it to advance our own issues, or do we go and ask our husbands and the men in our lives whether they think it's okay for us to spend the money that we earned on issues that benefit us and support us? Unfortunately, my experience working with, you know, trying to work with women who are professional women, who are women of color, who are building their economic power, is that they are often beholden to the approval of men in their circle and will be talked out of what they wanted to spend their money on, and convinced that it's not important. And then they won't give their money to the arts, and they won't buy that artwork that was calling their name, and they won't participate because they won't make decisions themselves. And in some ways, this is a really good thing, because women typically spend their money on their families, whereas, you know, we see, for example, in a lot of the developing world, the narrative around microfinance has been, if you give money to men, they spend it on themselves. They spend it on drinking, gambling, and other, you know, individualistic, self-aggrandizing pursuits. Whereas if you give it to women, they spend it on the welfare of their families and their communities. And I think to a large extent, I don't know about with men, but I would say that for women, the way that they spend money, even in here in the United States, is that kind of community oriented. But then the narrative around the art market is so individualistic and oriented towards having personal power and personal aggrandizement in a certain way that it doesn't compute for women to spend their money that way. And so they don't necessarily always see, we don't always see how we could be spending our money differently in a way that would actually advance equity in like deep ways that we don't think about, because we don't think our money is that important. So that's something I've been observing more recently that I would like to see change. I would like to see more women who have good jobs, you know, write checks to institutions, be on the boards. You know, I'm not that successful financially as it goes, but like I'm successful enough that I joined a board, you know, and I write them checks. And it's a women-run, women-founded organization, and I'm really proud of it. It's Joan, and I recommend a lot of you, you know, do the same thing, because small organizations, FCCW, you know, that focus on
The
these
Judith
issues,
Center is
right?
really happy to take your money.
Yeah, you know, and I want to say, you know, yeah, give your money to the big institutions too, but the small institutions will do a lot more with your modest contribution. It's so meaningful to them. So I do think we get up in this big picture, like big kind of celebrity mindset around the arts. We can't all afford a Jori Murat too. But that doesn't mean you can't go out and find an artist today who has a similar profile, who makes work that connects with you, and support that person very directly, or support, you know, women-owned galleries and all that kind of thing. But it means we need to also be like confident, like really confident that we make good choices and we know how to spend our money.
I'd like to ask one follow-up question to that, which is, I think this point is really interesting. You had brought it up when we chatted previously, that on a practical level, I mean, sure, a lot of women have a lot less wealth than men, but we do have some chump change. And what I heard you say in this previous conversation was that in a practical sense, we actually can be making a difference, but yet there's like the residue of the old system in our mind. Like we imagine it's this impenetrable thing. And I wonder how that relates to older generations versus younger generations. With the older generations, you know, I was born in 1973, and I think that may be the year women got to use credit cards for the first time. You know, there are many women older than me where that was like a way of life. Like we don't have rights, and they internalize this. So I think there is a lot of that residue still existing for certain generations. Do you see a difference there?
Yes and no. You know, my grandmothers were both in arranged marriages that were teenagers married to adult men. I don't think that the oppression that we're talking about is far in the past, but it's also not my oppression. My oppressions are different. But there's more to that question. Sorry, ask me again.
Well, I was asking if you see a difference in this residue, in this maybe false perception that we're still
Yes. So I
oppressed.
think what's happening for young people right now is that they are incredibly open-minded and have access to a tremendous range of information really young that helps them identify who they are, and very often live their truth much younger than any previous generation, which is really incredible and wonderful. And at the same time, this kind of closing grip of fascism around all of our necks is making everybody really scared. So as soon as economic precarity rears its head, and that economic precarity may be kind of manufactured in the sense that, you know, but also not, right? So if you're a middle-class kid with middle-class parents, your parents might be looking at not expecting their retirement to go as far as they thought it was going to. And even though they're like pretty well off, they still start putting more pressure on you. Well, you know, you need to get a good salary job. You need to get health insurance. I'm speaking for myself, right? I wanted to be an artist, and my parents were like, sure, but like, what about your 9 to 5, right? And so that kind of anxiety, and now it's harder and harder to get those jobs. Everybody's got part-time work. Everybody's underemployed. Or, you know, there's this tremendous pressure to be making your money through like gig work or through influencer, which is really just accelerated gig work. And so how can you live your truth when you can't pay your rent, you can't buy your groceries, you're living with 5 roommates? And so I do think it's a yes and no again, because yeah, absolutely, right? Like the kind of liberatory rhetoric that I hear my kids or my students expressing makes my heart go through sizes. And then they go out in the world and they just get hammered, you know. And I wish that I was in a better position to help. I wish I had more of a ladder for them to climb up. And I think, you know, my mentors who, you know, have predominantly been white women who have been in institutional positions of power, but never in as much institutional power as the men in their vicinity, and never with quite enough power to really truly break through the barriers that would be required for me in many cases. you know, and I accept that because it's no individual's responsibility, but I often feel that way now. Like I don't really have quite enough clout to make that difference for the people that I would want to make it for. So I think for young people facing that in relationships with mentors who are like, but I had to leave my institution because I got pushed out, or I only have a part-time job. How can I offer you something tangible? You know, they do what they have to do, and I don't fault them. I do see people being pushed underground right now. Yeah.
I had a follow-up question, but maybe I'll put this to the group actually. And it's a question about, you know, what I think is coming up repeatedly here is that it's so hard to separate out this question of gender from class struggle and also race struggle as it connects to that in the United States in particular. And I wonder what you guys think. I mean, can we be talking about gender as the separated thing, or would we be better served to really focus on class struggle or another type of focus? And I open that up to anyone here.
Maybe I'll just respond quickly and push it over to conclude my part, which is, again, this idea, you know, there's this illustration that goes around and it's like the boss yells at the dad and the dad comes home and yells at the mom and the mom yells at the kid and then the kid yells at the dog, right? And I do think that we need to be really mindful of that chain of not only approval, but also the passing of responsibility down to those who are more structurally oppressed in order to resolve this issue. And what that does intersectionally is it puts women in a position, you know, women of any race are still structurally more empowered than children, right? And so often for us to achieve our maximum capability in a world that is governed by the values of men, we need to abandon our children, whether that means not having children, which of course is a choice, but some people I think are pressured to not choose it because they're faced with, for example, more precarious employment if you have children, which I think, you know, the freelancers on this panel can attest to. And that's a mixed blessing. So yeah, let me turn it over to other folks. Thank you.
Just a kind of aside, looking at all of you out there, it's important to remember that, for one thing, against all odds, you cannot stop artists from making art. And that is why we have a culture. Now, it's in horrible situations a lot of the time now, but this will always be the case. And I applaud all of you for doing this, and all of you here who are trying to make things better.
We're not sure, but we can't stop artists. We're not sure, but we can't stop artists.
Yeah, but I think it's really important. Anyway, anybody else?
Remind me.
The question was if we can, in talking about this question of gender equality, you know, can we sort of think of it as a separate issue, or are we better served by thinking of it so deeply connected to perhaps class struggle and or race struggle?
I've never lived my life being able to bifurcate myself. And so if you do that, then you bifurcate me. So I come with class, I come with race, I come with gender, I come with, you know, non-generational wealth. I come with access to generational wealth because of my jobs that I've had. I come from under-resourced, but sitting at certain tables, having access to, I mean, it's not that complicated to actually say, we're gonna look at like reality. And I was just looking out at this amazing crowd of people and thought, wow, this really reflects the art world. Like, look around, you know, like it's a particular kind of diversity, right? That really is the art world. And so I would say, no, you can't separate those things. I think the dangerous and precarious space that we found ourselves in is because we've actually done that. And I think that comes from a history of wanting to specialize in one thing, wanting to go only deep in one area and not have those things be a part of an ecosystem. I love talking about artists and artists being at the center of so many things, but I think that also has been dangerous because I think that artists have oftentimes found themselves in the space of being kind of the hope, but they don't do it by themselves either. And we've created conditions where artists actually have started to believe they only do it themselves. And that doesn't reflect the society in which we live in and the kind of bound upness we need in order to be safe. And we have contributed as as institutions, as independent people, as what Mark Bradford would call like the 1099s of the world. You know what I mean? Like, you know, he said once on a panel that the world is divided into 990s and 1099s, you know? And those things are codependent, you know? And I think we have said it's either or. And I think class comes into play in really serious ways when people are told you should just quit your job, whatever that is, and go do whatever you feel, because the reality is that if you don't come from resources where you can just quit your job and do whatever you feel, then you will find yourself unhoused and you will actually find yourself in conditions that are even unsafer. You know, so I really think that the idea that we are promoting sometimes of this separation creates conditions that we continue to perpetuate some of the lies that we've been told. And I find that really problematic. And so if I take it very personally, which I do, I'm honored to be sitting next to a Guerrilla girl. I'm also challenged by the fact that we've been discussing this for 40-something years, 50-something years. Like, this is urgent. And so there's no reward or claim. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should all be pissed off. And really looking at it, what I love about this, and I love about what Jori said, and what I love about what you said, is that you're talking about it from your own perch. Like, what am I doing? And I think the more we talk about what am I doing, what am I responsible for, how am I doing these things, wherever we sit in an institution or in a community center or in our families, you actually can do something. But this whole like pontificating so everyone else listens is ridiculous. In many ways, right? And so I think that those things are bound up in ways that are like really, they become unrecognizable because we keep promoting that. Sorry, I'm a little.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to come back to you with one more question. I'd like to flip it back to Anu really fast because you brought up a point the other day that I think builds on what Sandra's talking about, and this question of gender and class. And it's one of, you know, how within the art world there's kind of a fetishization of the star. You know, and there's this stereotype of like, oh, these ones make it to the top and they make all this money and that's what we got to go for and we got to hang out with those ones. And maybe we could speak about that for a second, because the system sets up its own sort of class hierarchy that it then worships. And the other day you were sharing with me, you know, we might be better served to kind of move away to move towards another model.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll respond to that by saying that typically when I talk to young artists about their economic prospects, I tell them that what I consider to be great success in the art world is that you make enough money from the art that you're creating through sales, through grants, through you know, public art commissions, wherever you get that money, make enough money to pay to make your art. That means your materials, your studio time, and that's it. That is enough expectation to put on your practice, have it pay for itself. That is success. You will probably still, and in LA, I can guarantee you will need to have another job. And everyone that I work with at UCLA is an incredibly accomplished, very prominent artist. Some of them are in the Biennale right now. They all have a day job. It's teaching at UCLA, right? That's a little bit invisible, but you know, back in the day, I grew up in New York. I was working in the New York art world in the 90s before I came to California. And one of the big differences, not only between New York and the West Coast, but also now between New York and itself 30 years ago, is that artists teach. Artists in New York didn't used to teach. You were only in teaching if you didn't make economically productive art. But now the cost of living, the amount of competition, even if you have a gallery, even if you're showing and selling, it may not be enough. And you still have to teach and you have a job. And other artists take nonprofit jobs. Or recently, I know a really great artist who took a job at one of the commercial galleries here in town, because we need to survive. And I don't think there's any shame in that. I actually think it's super, super valuable to look at it that way, because that's a bar we can reach. And then we can be like, hey, I'm a great success. I make just enough money from my writing, because writing doesn't pay, to take myself on a residency once a year for 2 weeks so I can focus on writing. And for those 2 weeks, I'm not a curator and I'm not a parent, and I don't really have to think about my gender or my embodiment or my structural oppression, except if I want to, because I want to make art out of it. And even just 2 weeks a year, right? Like, it's just incredible to have that. So, making that for myself is like, oh, I'm successful. Like, that, to me, that feels like success. In a way that for other people, maybe, having a more impressive title, or, working at a bigger institution, or, that might look like success to you, and that's totally valid. For me, I've decided that success looks like I can leave for 2 weeks a year and nobody tries to reach me,
Go ahead, Sandra.
When I hear that question, I think maybe we could ask, what is the function of an art star? Like, what could we do with that platform, as opposed to taking down the art stars? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what is that? Like, why does it always have, like, how do we actually not buy into treating people the way that we don't like to be treated? So if we actually train art stars to actually, when you get that for all of us, for the field, for the industry, like, what's the platform? So I think about, like, Toni Morrison said, the function of freedom is to set somebody else free. Like, literally, like, if you start, like, I mean, it's almost like the Rainbow Coalition. They had 2 platforms, the above ground and the below ground. Like, why we always have to be above ground? Like, it's just, you're not above ground, you know what I mean? I don't even know who you are, really. You know what I mean? It's just like there's a function here, but then there's like the above ground is that, like, oh, you know my other name, and I can move through the world and do these things. So, like, why are we becoming the one note in our response to this stuff? So I'm like, yeah, Mark Bradford, go do something in Leimert Park. That's awesome. Yes, I love that you're like, your freedom is to be like, I'm going to write for 2 weeks. I need that, right? Because you become more muscular. This person's freedom is like working at the Nick Cave is like, I keep a job at, at the institution because I actually like teaching. The idea that someone is an artist and they have to teach, can we get rid of that? William T. Williams founded the Studio Museum as a teacher. You know what I mean? Like, why? I'm like, I don't even want to talk about people who hate teaching.
Yeah.
Just don't even give it the airtime. Like, why don't we focus on this other thing? You know what I mean? Like, there's some serious value in these other ways of just being like, okay, like, okay, we don't need to talk about you. You're an amazing teacher and you're an amazing activist. Great. Oh, you're an amazing person who worked with corporate collections. Fantastic. We need you there. Keep that mindset, though. You know what I mean? Like, how do we get to that space? But we are demonized. We know that people are going to exist in these spaces. We know it. So can we train people differently? Train them to really think about what is best for society that will serve them better from their perch. But yeah, I'm like, I like teaching. I like building buildings. I like talking about master services agreements. I like it all. And I want it all. And I want to be great at it all. Someone else wants to just be great at that one thing. That's amazing, because when I need that one thing, I know you're the best fucking person for me to call. But we keep doing this other thing. It's like binary, and it's not necessary. I'm not saying you're doing that, by the way. I love that there's something beautiful and textured about one knowing themselves. Mm-hmm. We aren't knowing ourselves.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing. I mean, I understand all of that completely and feel it, and I'm sorry. Feel that and what you're saying, and we all live through that. But there's another side to it too, which is there is incredible bias in the world that keeps people from doing what they can do. And this isn't, about making money. It's not about that. It's about institutions, museums, and a lot of these fancy collectors and stuff like that, still mostly buy super expensive art by white males. And there's been a lot of change. We're all working on that. My life is devoted to that, but it still exists. So to me, it's really important to keep doing what we Guerrilla Girls do. And things are getting a little better, but the system really sucks. And part of it is that you get the idea, somehow these people starting out get the idea that they can make it big and they're going to be famous and it's going to work out, when really, whether that happens or not, being an artist is a kind of full-time, lifetime job where you're always trying to solve the issues you create for yourself by the kind of work that you are doing. And the Guerrilla Girls, it just makes me remember this, how things have changed a little bit. I'm not a proselytizer for the things have changed, but because of so many people fighting for change, it has changed in institutions. I mean, you know that from being in institutions a little bit, and things are a little better. So in 1984. The Museum of Modern Art in New York had an exhibition called An International Survey of Painting and Sculpture. In this exhibition, there were 169 artists. 16 of them were female, and there were only three artists of color, all male. So a group of artists in New York called for a protest, and there was a picket line outside MoMA, and people were, yelling, placards, this kind of thing. And I was there, and some friends of mine were there. And what was really depressing was all the museum goers still went past the picket line and right into the museum. They didn't care. They thought it was ridiculous, women protesting about the state of, women artists or something like that. And I probably think about that every week now for like 41 years, because that was the aha moment. That was the moment I just said, there's got to be a better way, and joined together with some other, friends and artists, and tried to figure out how you would do that. And at first, we felt, let's go after people by their names. Let's be as annoying and, make people angry and all this kind of stuff. But we were always using kind of the strategies of advertising to twist an issue around and present it in a different way. And it didn't work at first, but we were amazed that our first poster on the street was like a huge sensation. I remember being so nervous, I thought, oh my God, no, this is going to be the end of the whole thing. Nobody will care. So we just kept doing it for decades. And I think what we've learned is there's so many ways, there's the actual problems, but there's so many ways to twist it around and show it to people in some kind of unforgettable way, whether they're angry, whether they're happy to know they have people like them, that kind of thing. And I really think we can, everything we do inside the institutions is usually important, but everything we do outside is really important too. And you have to make that part of, I'm sure everyone here has made that as part of their lives. And for me personally, as founder of the Guerrilla Girls, it's just made all the difference to keep knocking, keep banging away, keep bothering people. It's a gift to be able to do that too.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for that gift, because I feel like that is the one area where we can say some progress has been made, is in spotlighting the structural sexism and racism that are rampant in the art world, art market, as you've defined it. And that the Guerrilla Girls has been you've been so important in sharing that information with a wicked sense of humor, keeping the masks on as long as you have. The last time we met, I was interviewing Katja Kolvitz, asking her, when are the masks coming off? Isn't it time? Not today though, right?
You know, it's our shtick, right? I mean, people have costumes.
The shtick has to continue.
performers, you
But I do, we're talking about what the Guerrilla Girls have done. I just ran into Nicole Hebron here and what she's done with, thank you. From Nicole with Gallery Tally. It was so important. It was the other thing I was just going to say is that in my awakening, yes, I'm covering male artists that I don't respect or don't like. But the other thing was seeing data for galleries that I liked in LA and realizing they're showing 80% male artists, and I didn't even realize it. And it was Gallery Tally that brought that to my attention a decade ago. So all of the efforts by women and non-binary folks who are really looking at the structural problems, and that's where we do have to categorize, unfortunately, in order to get the data. So the Burns-Halperin report, I noticed, has been up on the screen a lot. And I remember they started with, they were looking at women artist acquisitions in museums. And then they looked at Black women artist acquisition by museums. And you thought the women category was bad. It was like only 11% of acquisitions by museums in the years up to 2018, the decade before, were of women artworks, only 11%. Is that right, Catherine? You know these. By now, you know
it's
these.
up there too.
Yeah, you know
we're
these
flashing
by heart.
through it, but
only 11%. But then when you drill down to Black women, and so they're they're slicing and dicing for good reasons, so we can see things more clearly. It was 1%. And to wrap this up, to go back to the Art Star question, I think one of the problems with Art Stars is they obscure the realities that we're looking at.
Yeah.
That I remember when Julia Halperin and Charlotte Burns were doing this report, they're both writers I've known, and they were my editors before at various points. They found out that there was an increase in auction prices for Black artists because of Basquiat. So, these things, they're all kind of intertwined, but just thinking about Art Stars, I was just wanted to add to that conversation. I think one of the problems with Art Stars, you're absolutely right, Sandra, by the time they become Art Stars, they should be taking their communities with them, right? But the other problem is that all of our focus in the media and everyone who focuses, the market, the collectors, the curators, the museums who focus on the Art Stars, that in some ways it's obscuring how difficult it is to be an artist, even in the same category.
I'd like to say something because I think what we're talking about, I think, Keita, you brought up this question I wanted to ask us about. We don't have a ton of time left, so we'll just barrel on through the rest of our topics and deal with it as a big hodgepodge. I wanted to ask about public shaming and how effective that is, and I think that's what you brought up. And I think what you're bringing up, Jori, is the importance of data and also the work of individuals. I want to keep coming back to that. Like, I know the Guerrilla Girls have had a lot of members come and go, but I really love to give you, Keita, a personal applause for your dedication over the decades. We think of the Guerrilla Girls as this posse of infinite gorillas, but
Not shame. We call it creative complaining, not shaming.
creative complaining. Very good, very good. I'm going to call it public shaming, but you can keep calling it that. But I think what we're talking about is a difference between change coming from outside sort of institutions where power is entrenched and how individuals can actually make a difference and how it is working. We are getting some traction with that, and we need to keep that up. We need to keep pushing that. But I would also like to ask Sandra a question, which I had, which was, because you have worked with so many museum institutions, and I know your focus, one of your focuses has been education, do you see that as an area where museums can get traction, getting people to think differently, bringing certain kinds of content to them? But on top of that, I would imagine your answer is yes, because you keep working in that area. So I guess it's very valuable to you. But it seems within institutions we're in such a gridlock with the funding coming from wealthy white folk. So I think that's tricky. It's a hard spot to get real change when that seems to be the case. So I wonder if you might speak about that.
I should say, I've worked in this field for a little over 30 years, and I've never really been described as an insider, which is fascinating. And so my work is conditioned on me being both outside and inside, and practicing a heavy dose of institutional critique. So the fact that you can't be that, or that people aren't describing it as that, I think is really also not. I think it's a way of working, that I think. I would also say, like, the Guerrilla girls, while they're external, they have actually become institutionalized in interesting ways. And so, like, to have a show at the Getty is really kind of like, you're in the institution at this point. You're a part of the canon. And I think that there's that beautiful tension where you can have these spaces inside, you can be inside and outside. I think what I'm speaking to is the need for that. I would say, through the lens of education, if I were to take, like, say something like social practice, which comes out of community engagement work, which community engagement work in museums was historically the work of Black women and women of color and Latinx women and Asian women. And they were the ones who actually worked within these institutions and said, we need to actually figure out how to, Lowry Stokes Sims, take these Matisses to Borough Hall in the Bronx. Like, we need to figure out how to do these things. I also think education at some institutions has been, over the years, kind of created a bridge for people that haven't historically been able to be tapped by a curator to get their foot in the door. The curator realizes, oh my goodness, they're really interesting. Who was that artist that you showed in the shop, or did that workshop, or you invited me to this thing? They end up becoming, it has historically been the entryway. Then we saw a shift where women in particular, and artists of color in particular, were like, don't call me education. Do not call me community programs. Do not call me at all. Because I'm going to get pigeonholed there. I'm going to be stuck there. So no one ever talks about the fact that Lowry Stokes Sims came out of community programs at the Met. Like, she knows how to think about people and the public because she cared about them. Because if you center your practice around making issues and ideas accessible and thinking about what is in the public consciousness and tying your curatorial practice to that, or your practice to that, then perhaps people will see you. As she once talked to the Studio Museum interns, I had her come and speak to them when we were both working there, and I said, can you just tell them how you, like what you did? She was like, you guys are so impatient. I worked at the Met. She said she worked at the Met 10 years before she had her first show. And she said, but at that point, she had curated shows. She was curating shows at the Jamaica Center for Performing Arts. She had a public eco practice. Right now, we're producing people that they think the institution is supposed to do everything for them. They're supposed to come there, get trained there, come up with an idea, get money there, do all these things. And I'm just kind of like, wow. Like, if you are someone who's trying to transform the institution, you have to know that that's not the way to do it. But we are producing sometimes folks that really believe that that is the only way. I come here from 9 to 5. I'm supposed to do everything with them. This person doesn't get produced by a 9 to 5. You don't get this from a 9. You don't get this. You don't get this. You know what I mean? You just don't get these kinds of folks. So when it comes to funders too, I think, like, tapping into kind of the fact that it's not necessarily that these are white funders. And I'm saying this as a woman of color, I'm saying this as someone who's worked in many places, but it's the kind of white funder. This study, that study says that we have had more women join boards, but we've had less women artists collected. What does that tell you? It's the kind of woman. It's the kind of person. It's the kind of thinking. It's the kind of point of view. So it's not like demonizing white men who have money. It's the kind of white man, you know? And so I think that if we can think differently, and it's also, some of it is just not, one has to be willing to say that's not something I can take. I'm willing to be a part of that institution. Someone asked me recently, you know, what do you do if you work at a museum or an institution and they don't want to listen to your point of view? And I was like, I asked the group, I was like, what do you do? And people were like, well, you talk to the director and you talk to this person. And I'm like, well, the person was like, well, it's the director that's saying they don't back. I'm like, but then you don't work there. Like, you have to make some choices. I'm not saying leave that job without another job if that's not what you from your personal perch can do. But I think we keep thinking that it's a one-trick pony. It's not the white male person that's the demon. It's the kind of white man. It's the kind of woman. It's the kind of woman that will sit in that same seat and treat women poorly. It's the same. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes we behave the oppressor's behavior. And so for me, I think if you just pull back a little bit, it's like when you're raising children, you know, don't go and be unkind to people if you want to be kind. It's like, let's just take this all down, you know, to like the basics. You know, we go to school and we learn about head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and you learn the body parts, and then you get into high school and you're talking about anatomy, and kids are like, I can't do this. And I'm like, sure you can. It's the same thing. Yes, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You
I
are.
am, with a little bit of nuance feels human. Because there's I think also people hire great leaders like Anne, and sometimes we hire great leaders and we don't empower them to be the leaders that they've been brought there to be. And I think that's a real crucial function of institutional transformation. But we also shouldn't hire unqualified people to lead our institutions either.
Can I just say one?
I just want to say, in the interest of time, I don't know if we can maybe open it up to one or two questions. We need to unfortunately cut this short. We're out of time. This panel could go all day. There's so much more we wanted to cover: data, media, how the media landscape has been changing. I know each of you would enjoy talking with any of our panelists, just as long as you can. So maybe after this, feel free to come up to us. But did you have a burning point, Keita?
Just one very quick. What you say is so interesting because we get invited by hundreds of museums to criticize the museum on its own walls. And I think that has a lot to do with what you're saying, because it's hard to do it so publicly. You know, you have to do it another way if you work there. But hey, bring the Guerrilla girls and we'll investigate it and put it in jail, you know.
What if you told them to criticize themselves? You do the work. You work there.
I think we do a really good job of it.
Oh, you do.
But you're actually, I mean,
do we?
I think they are criticizing themselves if they even invite us to some extent.
Let's see. We have a question out in the audience right there. Go ahead. Sure.
I'm wondering, speaking to this topic of social ecology, and if we're looking at that everyone deserves time and space to be an artist as well, should we really even say an artist exists? Is that still a valuable category? And what, if so, is the role of an artist when they should also be pickling and preserving food, and should also be serving their community and working in a way that is very much local.
Well, first I would like to say, I think an artist is a category that we self-impose. So if one identifies as an artist, then the category exists. Secondly, I would say when it comes to movement work, everybody doesn't all do all the jobs. Maybe the artist isn't the person pickling the food. Maybe the art has its own role to play in motivating the ecosystem and reflecting the experiences. And I think as soon as we eliminate art and we focus on only the pragmatic, that we lean into authoritarianism, unfortunately. So I think we really need to resist that. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to say, following on the previous conversation around the star system, is that we really need to resist the temptation to experience our world parasocially, which we're highly incentivized to do, especially young people, because the parasocial allows you to believe that other people are actors and you're merely a spectator in your own life. But we don't need that. We need empowerment. So people need to, and there's something about that outsourcing of agency to the star that feels comfortable to us. But it's maybe too much of an expectation.
Great, thank you. Right here.
I'm loud. What are, anyone can answer this, what are you most excited about to work on or to platform right now?
In terms of this question of advancing gender equity, or is there a more specific focus?
Life that gets you up in the morning and wanting to propel this conversation forward. What are you most excited about?
You should say something about the Judith Center.
Okay, why not? Well, great. Well, I'm an artist who actually has a day job, and one of them is running this nonprofit. And I have to say, I sort of took it on as a response to feeling a lot of pressure from the commercial market that I feel like was reducing my personhood into a very flat thing that didn't feel like who I want to be. And so I started this project, this nonprofit, and we're focused on mapping structural sexism. We're doing it through exhibitions. We have a book club, a poetry project. We have a lending library, and we do public conversations. And that's really getting me up in the morning. It was a deep honor to be with all of you today. I'm so thrilled. I'd like to acknowledge Alejandro Berkowitz, a wonderful CalArts student who worked with me for some months to research the data, to find the most recent figures, and to compile this. We actually had about 100 statistics and boiled it down. And that's a whole other panel. And as a result of this conversation, we're talking about maybe whipping out a series in time, because there's so many little nuggets that came up today. And there are a lot of other points of focus we did not hit, specifically about data and what's going on out in the world around the compilation of that. That's a huge topic. There's another one about media, what's happening with art criticism. Sandra has had some interesting points in other public conversations about, I don't know if I'll word this rightly, but how dumbness has become a kind of new thing that's being popularized, or something. I'm sure I'm botching that, but I think you worded it differently. But there's so many rich ways to come at this question. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, and especially Kim for organizing this day of events.